Have you ever felt invisible in your own life, present for everyone else but absent for yourself? Like a supporting character in a story that was supposed to be yours. Have you ever answered every call, solved every problem, carried every burden, only to realize that when your hands were full and your heart was tired, no one noticed? This is the story of a man who learned that the hardest person to choose is often yourself. In a quiet suburban neighborhood where houses stood in neat rows and lawns were trimmed with careful precision, there lived a man named Aaron Mitchell. He was known as Dependable Aaron. Reliable Aaron, the man who never said no. If a neighbor's car refused to start on a cold winter morning, Aaron was there with jumper cables before the sun fully rose. If someone needed help moving furniture, assembling shelves, fixing a leaking pipe, or even just listening to complaints about life, Aaron would quietly show up with a calm smile and patient eyes. Aaron believed that being useful made him valuable, that being needed made him important, and that saying yes made him good. From a young age he had been praised for being helpful. Teachers admired his obedience. Relatives admired his manners. Friends admired his loyalty. So he built his identity around availability. He felt proud that people relied on him, proud that he could solve problems, proud that he was the one everyone called first. But what no one saw, not even Aaron at first, was the quiet erosion happening inside him. His evenings disappeared into errands for others. His weekends vanished into favors. His own apartment slowly became a reflection of neglect. The paint in his bedroom peeled at the corners. The kitchen sink dripped softly at night. The bookshelf he once dreamed of building remained just a stack of wooden planks in the corner, waiting for a time that never seemed to come. Aaron worked a full-time job at a small marketing firm downtown. His role demanded creativity and focus, yet most nights he arrived home too exhausted to read, think, or create. He told himself it was temporary, that once things settled down, he would take care of his own life. But things never settled down because he never allowed them to. Every time he tried to set aside an evening for himself, someone would call, someone would text, someone would knock. His best friend, Lucas, often joked, "You are like public property, man," and Aaron would laugh, pretending it was harmless humor. Deep down though, he felt a strange tightness in his chest whenever someone assumed his time belonged to them. He would silence that feeling quickly, convincing himself that good people do not complain. Good people serve. Good people endure. One autumn evening, after spending hours helping a co-worker prepare for a presentation that was not even his responsibility, Aaron walked home through streets covered in golden leaves. He felt drained, not physically but emotionally, as if something invisible had been siphoned from him. When he reached his apartment, he noticed water stains spreading across his ceiling. A leak he had ignored for weeks had grown worse. He stared at it for a long time, realizing he had postponed calling a repair service because he had been too busy fixing everyone else's crises the next morning. Before he could even research contractors, his phone buzzed. It was his neighbor Mrs. Reynolds asking for help carrying groceries. He hesitated for a split second, looking at the ceiling stain, then replied, "Of course. I will be right there." This pattern repeated itself so consistently that Aaron stopped noticing the choice he made every time. He did not see it as a choice anymore. It felt automatic, instinctive, as if saying yes was breathing and saying no was suffocation. One rainy Saturday, the breaking point arrived quietly. Aaron had finally blocked off the day to work on his own apartment. He planned to fix the leak, organize his living room, and maybe even start building the bookshelf. He made coffee early, rolled up his sleeves, and for the first time in months felt a spark of anticipation. But before he could begin, Lucas called, sounding stressed and overwhelmed about a last-minute move to a new apartment across town. Aaron felt the familiar tug of obligation, the subtle guilt that whispered, "What kind of friend would you be if you refused without thinking too deeply?" he said. "I will come help." Hours passed under grey skies as Aaron carried heavy boxes up narrow stairs, sweat soaked through his shirt. His back ached. Lucas thanked him casually, assuming his presence was guaranteed. By the time Aaron returned home in the evening, the rain had intensified. He opened his apartment door and froze. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, forming a small puddle on the wooden floor. The damage had spread. The walls were damp. The air smelled of mold. He stood there in silence, listening to the steady drip. Something inside him cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet, painful clarity. He realized that while he had been rescuing someone else's transition, his own home had been falling apart. That night he barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the shadow of water stains creeping across the ceiling, asking himself questions he had avoided for years. Why do I feel so empty when I am always helping? Why does being needed not feel fulfilling anymore? Why does my life feel like a waiting room for everyone else's emergencies the following week? Exhaustion followed him like a shadow. At work, he struggled to concentrate. Small mistakes slipped through his normally careful process. His manager pulled him aside gently, asking if everything was all right. Aaron forced a smile and assured him it was just a busy season. But inside, he knew it was more than busyness. It was depletion. One evening, while walking through a small park near his apartment, Aaron noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a bench, feeding crumbs to pigeons. The man's posture was relaxed, his movements slow and deliberate. Aaron had seen him before, but never stopped. This time, something compelled him to sit down beside him. The man introduced himself as Mr. Whitaker, a retired school principal who had spent decades guiding young minds. They exchanged casual conversation at first, but eventually Aaron found himself confessing more than he expected. He spoke about being constantly available, about the leak in his ceiling, about feeling tired in a way sleep could not fix. Mr. Whitaker listened patiently, then asked a simple question. When was the last time you did something only for yourself? Aaron searched his memory and came up empty. He tried to recall a day without obligation, without responsibility for someone else's comfort. He could not remember. The old man nodded thoughtfully and pointed toward a nearby fountain in the park. Water flowed continuously from its center, sparkling under the evening lights. He said, "Do you see that fountain? It gives water freely, but it is connected to a source that keeps it full. Imagine if the source were cut off. It would still try to give for a while, but eventually it would run dry." Aaron felt the metaphor settle heavily in his mind. He realized he had been acting like a fountain disconnected from its source, pouring out time, energy, attention, without replenishment over the next few days. The image of the fountain followed him everywhere, while answering emails, while cooking dinner, while helping someone assemble a desk. He started noticing the cost of each, yes, not in money but in energy, in peace, in neglected tasks piling up in his own life. One morning he woke up early, before his alarm, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. He would not say yes automatically anymore. He would pause, breathe, and consider the impact on himself that very day. His co-worker Jenna approached him with a familiar request. She needed help finishing a report she had procrastinated on. Aaron felt the reflex to agree, but he remembered the fountain. he remembered the leak. He remembered the sleepless night. He inhaled slowly and said, "I am sorry, I cannot help today. I need to focus on my own deadlines." Jenna looked surprised, almost offended, but she nodded and walked away. Aaron's heart pounded as if he had committed a crime. Guilt washed over him in waves, yet beneath the guilt there was something else. A faint but undeniable sense of strength that evening. Instead of rushing to solve someone else's problem, Aaron called a contractor and scheduled repairs for his apartment. He cleared his living room floor and began assembling the bookshelf he had postponed for nearly a year. As he tightened the final screw, he felt a quiet satisfaction he had not experienced in a long time. The next test came quickly. Lucas called again, this time asking for help fixing a minor plumbing issue. Aaron paused. He weighed his own plans for the evening. He had set aside time to read and rest. He replied gently, "I cannot come tonight, but I can recommend a good plumber." Lucas sounded disappointed, but the world did not collapse. The friendship did not shatter, the sky did not fall, days turned into weeks. And each no became slightly easier. Aaron discovered that many problems solved themselves when he did not rush to intervene. Neighbors began handling their own tasks. Co-workers became more responsible for their assignments. Some people drifted away, perhaps uncomfortable with his new boundaries, but others adjusted and even respected him more with reclaimed time. Aaron started exploring interests he had abandoned. He joined a weekend photography class. He began jogging in the mornings. He redecorated his apartment with plants and artwork. His home transformed from a neglected space into a sanctuary, and as his environment improved, so did his mood. He noticed that helping others felt different now. When he chose to assist someone from a place of abundance rather than obligation, the act carried joy instead of resentment. He was no longer running on empty. He was giving from a place of fullness one evening. Months after that rainy Saturday, Aaron stood in his living room. Sunlight filtering through clean windows, the ceiling freshly painted, the bookshelf filled with novels and framed photographs from his photography class. He realized that his life finally felt like it belonged to him. He returned to the park bench to thank Mr. Whitaker. But the old man was not there. Another passerby mentioned that he had moved closer to his family in another city. Aaron smiled softly, understanding that some teachers appear briefly, just long enough to shift your direction as seasons changed. Aaron continued practicing boundaries. Sometimes he still felt the old tug of guilt. Sometimes he feared disappointing people, but he reminded himself that choosing himself was not an act of selfishness. It was an act of sustainability. He learned that saying no did not mean he cared less. It meant he cared wisely. He learned that being reliable did not require self-sacrifice, and that true friendships survived honest boundaries. One afternoon, while helping a neighbor plant flowers, a task he accepted willingly after finishing his own work, the neighbor remarked, "You seem happier these days." Aaron laughed softly and replied, "I finally made time for my own life." Looking back, he understood that the biggest shift was not external but internal. He no longer equated usefulness with worth. He no longer believed that constant availability defined goodness. He understood that respect begins with self-respect, and that peace begins with permission. If you ever find yourself in Aaron's place, stretched thin between expectations, remember the fountain. Remember that even the most generous source must be connected to renewal. Remember that your time, your energy, your dreams are not secondary to everyone else's convenience, because the day you finally choose yourself is not the day you lose others. It is the day you stop losing yourself. And in that quiet decision, your world begins to come together, not with noise or applause, but with steady, sustainable peace.